the EMEA Business Development Manager for Kodak Software, and thanks for coming to this session about SharePoint Enterprise Content Management, which is SharePoint is ECM for the masses, and we're going to help you identify how to avoid the messes with Kodak support and Kodak partners. Before we enter the full subject of SharePoint ECM, I'd like to open a quick note about Kodak. You may have heard recently in the news about Kodak, and especially about Chapter 11, and I'd like to give you the details of what that exactly means. So the first notion to extract from here is that the US corporation, Eastman Kodak Company in the US only, is under Chapter 11. For all the other countries, UK, Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, Asia, it is business as usual. Typically, Chapter 11 means that we're going through a restructuring in order to refocus on the lines of business that are the most profitable and that are here for our future. Typically, document scanning and document output. So we're definitely focusing today, Kodak, into document scanning and document printing, both for the B2B applications and also for the B2C applications for the printing side. The good news is that we just secured some additional liquidity, so $950 million, in order to fund new investments and also to focus on some challenges that we need to address, typically some legacy liabilities. So what we can take also out of that is that this is Chapter 11, so it's a restructuring. It is not bankruptcy. Bankruptcy would be Chapter 7. So you of course all know the difference between 7 and 11, 7-11, I won't go through all that. But we're under Chapter 11, and typically companies such as General Motors or Chrysler recently went through Chapter 11 in order to be much more stronger after that. And one of the outtakes typically that we can get from General Motors that they're about to buy about 10%, I think, of a French car maker, Peugeot, and that's the only best future we can hope for Kodak. So thanks for your trust. We continue to develop our software and our product portfolio, and we continue to do business as usual under this restructuring process. That was for the American chapter that I'm about to close right now. So what we're going to talk about today is enterprise content management, and what are the key success factors in order to make it fully successful within your organization. From real life, I mean, enterprise content management is about you and me dealing with documents on a daily basis. And what we can see here in that typical example taken from Dilbert is that that charming lady over here is kind of reluctant with the scanning process. Typically, she's saying that if it's important, well, never mind, the scanner will jam. Or if it's not important, well, why should you bother with that? So what does that mean? What does that funny example, what is it talking about? It's talking about really user adoption. One of the first issues with enterprise content management is not technology, it is user adoption. If your users are not friendly and familiar with the new process and with the new change of methodology, then your ECM project is doomed to failure. A second example, and this one is talking about document retention. What happens in most organizations, or actually in several organizations today, with regards to the document life cycle? When it comes to an end, most of the times, there's nothing scheduled. Nothing is forecasted in order to say, yes, I need to save that document for 10 years, and then what? Do I need to destroy it? Do I need to approve it? Where does it go? In this example, of course, nothing has been scheduled. So the foundations that we learn from our customers' experience and from the feedback of our partners is that an ECM today really relies, most importantly, on user adoption, on methodology, and only, on the last time, on technology. And it's a technology vendor that say that to you today, right? I'm here to sell you technology, but actually it's not the most important at all. Typically, at Kodak, we've never seen an ECM project fail because of technology. Never, ever. It might fail because of lack of user adoption. It might fail because there's no discussion within the company and no methodology agreed between the lines of businesses. But technology is only the last thing. Nevertheless, we have technology, that's right, that may help improve the user adoption and that may reflect as close as possible the agreed methodology that you've put in place in your organization. So this is what we're going to see through this presentation. It can be as interactive as you want, so please feel free to raise any question. during the presentation or at the end of it. Enterprise content management. What is it that we're talking about? Beyond the technologies, we're actually talking about a strategy within an organization to deal with the life cycle of your documents and of your unstructured data. The structured data typically could be dealt with your ERPs, such as SAP, not to name it, and the more unstructured data, so any unpredictable content, it can be paper documents, it can be videos, it can be audio, sound, whatever, is dealt through ECM through 5 major steps, which are illustrated here. Those steps start with capture, because you need to capture the documents and the metadata related to those documents. Then we enter into the document management, or the content, more globally, management. And we have a word here, written collaboration, so we're already guessing that SharePoint might have a strong word to say on document management. Then storing, to access the document on a short term and to deliver it to the users. And then archive or preservation for the long-term document lifecycle. So it is really within those 5 steps that all your attention should really be focused, so that all your life cycle are really precisely defined according to those 5 steps. We will see during this presentation how SharePoint deals with those 5 steps. Of course, the center one, management, collaboration, is what SharePoint has been built for. But then we will see what it does well and what it does not so well, and where some independent software vendors, such as Kodak, but maybe also others, can help you fill in the gaps through some easy software add-ons, which are as most out of the box as possible. And we have some nice partners, and there's a small game, but there's one written just right there, and it's starting with an A, right? So I think you're going to guess that one. But before we enter into that, I'd like to talk about the best practices for enterprise content management, because SharePoint ECM is just an ECM, and we, Kodak, have been in the ECM world for years. Actually, we started with documents with microfilms since World War II, typically. So we have a strong legacy history about document management, and we're into digital since the 90s, and heavily engaged with Microsoft since 2009, where we pioneered the installation of Kodak solutions within the customer immersion experience centers, where users of SharePoint can go for free in those Microsoft centers and test all the different scenarios to test SharePoint, and also all the related solutions, such as SharePoint document management with Kodak add-ons. So the different points that you see listed here are the focus point that you should really follow before you buy any software, or before you buy any kind of technology, or before you actually agree on anything. It is really those steps that will, if you check them, that will make your ECM successful. The first one is governance. And behind that big word is actually just a reminder that ECM is not a project of the IT department. Not at all. It is a project it's an agreement actually between the different lines of business and the management of an organization to agree on the different processes, on the different definitions, on the different documents and processes life cycles within your organization to make your documents live and die. It's really about that. So governance is really the control of the whole process. A classification plan, such as in a public library, is of course mandatory in order to agree on the different definitions. What are the different metadata? Who can edit them, etc., etc. Typically, if you're looking for a book in a public library, maybe you're going to search for that book according to the author. But you could also look for it according to the color of the cover book, whatever. It is your classification plan. It needs to make sense, and therefore the need to strongly involve not only the IT department, but more importantly, the lines of businesses, because they know about their document, and they also know about the life cycle of their documents. Resources. Who will be dealing with those documents? It's going to be people like you and me, co-workers. It's going to be people who are here to approve, typically, documents. It's going to be people who are here to maintain the whole system. Because guess what? Once you have installed your new SharePoint ECM, well, it's going to have to evolve into SharePoint 2012 or beyond. So it's going to be always a running phase where you need to apply the appropriate resources to every part of the project. Change management is a success factor that should not be forgotten, really. because as we've seen in the Dilbert joke here, it's really about you and me making the whole ECM come to life. So there needs to be add-ons that are as easy as possible, processes that are easily trained and shared with all the organization in order for the ECM to be completely effective. And also to be able to forecast what about any exception? If something goes wrong in the process or something, that was not forecasted, what happens? Exceptions management comes into the play, which brings us to traceability in order to address all the needs to trace a whole process if you're audited typically. And finally, the retention policy that you need to define for every kind of document type, for every kind of process. So all of this needs actually, as you understand, much consultancy before the whole project takes life and before you think of any kind of technology. So as a consequence, as you've seen that all of this might take some time, what we've seen in many of our customers in different countries in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, is that many people actually have SharePoint, but also have other ECM legacy systems, such as Document, not to name it. And what they have done, in order to make it more efficient, is to test SharePoint ECM first on a given business process, typically incoming mails, right? Or invoice processing, or whatever, operations with airway bills or whatever, or call centers. What they've done, they started SharePoint ECM on one process within their company to test the whole thing and then to deploy it further on onto other lines of businesses. So the question that comes here on this slide, which process will you transition as a priority into SharePoint ECM? Well, I'm asking it to you today. Do you already have an idea of which process you want to move into SharePoint ECM? Or maybe a simpler question, do you use SharePoint today? How many people use SharePoint today? Okay. How many people use SharePoint 2010 today? Okay, so almost everybody. And do you use SharePoint for enterprise content management today? How many? No, not yet? Okay, so we'll share some real-life examples of real companies who have chosen SharePoint as an ECM and why. So typically, incoming mail can be a first use case to start SharePoint ECM. It can be done in a hybrid mode. Typically, you can have your legacy ECM system on one side, and maybe because of a merger and acquisition, you have SharePoint on the other side. And maybe you're thinking of making some savings about the cost of yearly maintenance of your legacy ECM system. So you can definitely do that. Typically with SharePoint 2010, and we have most SharePoint 2010 users here, so I won't focus too much on why SharePoint 2010 is better than 2007, but if I can take just one example, it's really typically document idea. Until SharePoint 2010, when you moved one document from one SharePoint place to another, you generated a duplicate. So of course, until SharePoint 2007, I think it was kind of hard to say that SharePoint was ECM friendly. It was not there yet, definitely, so whatever you heard. But now with SharePoint 2010, I think the legacy systems do have reasons, I would say, to really fear the SharePoint installation, because typically with managed metadata, so one common definition of any kind of term for a given column, or with business connectivity services that allow you to actually make a smooth transition between your ECM and your ERP, typically we agree, and all the experts agree, that SharePoint is definitely ready in its 2010 version for ECM. Still, what Kodak really says here is that in order to fully compete with all the existing legacy systems, Microsoft have not deployed in SharePoint some major features in order to be fully to be a full ECM. Only 3 of them, I think, you would need to add in order to make your SharePoint ECM fully operational. Of course, capture, in order to capture all the documents, as we've seen in the 5 phases of ECM. Workflow, there's some level of workflow within SharePoint, but to go beyond that, you would definitely need an add-on software in order to easily deploy, define, and use different workflows, typically to approve documents. And finally, storage and archive management, in order to deal with, on the long term, with all your documents. Typically, if you have invoices that you need to keep for 10 years, you need to have a storing policy that says that I don't need to save those invoices on the SQL server. It's going to be much too expensive if I keep them during 10 years on that SQL server. Then you need to have a software that identifies, yeah, this one is going to be saved for 10 years on a cheaper device. And that's the job of storage and archive management add-ons. So, of course, from a recommendation perspective, Kodak would, of course, recommend Kodak for capture. For workflow, we typically work with K2, also with Nintex. K2, they have a common demonstration with Kodak solutions, which I invite you to see at their booth. And AvePoint, on the storage and archive management side, are really professional at making the very heavy images, or the heavy binary large objects out of the SQL server and put on a cheaper device to be saved on the long term. So capture, workflow, and archive are the only add-ons that we would recommend for you to focus on. Again, focusing on the providers that are as out of the box as possible in terms of solution, because the add-ons should not be more complex than the actual ECM. And also with partners that are spread all around the world, since your companies and SharePoint is, of course, ubiquitous in different countries. So why ECM in SharePoint in the end? Because well, typically you already have it. So you might be using it for intranets, for IT projects. Why don't you leverage it to really fully deal with all your documents and all your processes with capture, workflow, and storage? For one part of your business process, or for all of them in a transition mode, is the best practice that we recommend to you. In-house expertise likely exists, and that might not be so true for other legacy systems. With other legacy systems, not only do you have to pay for maintenance costs, but also for training onto updated versions of other ECM systems. With the SharePoint resources that you have in-house, you can leverage that. And also the different partners that you can see today at the International SharePoint Conference. Some professionals, some subject matter experts on subject as precise as document management, but also some mobile SharePoint, et cetera, et cetera. So you can leverage some solution providers, such as the one we named, and also focus on out-of-the-box solutions. And what I'm going to show to you during this presentation is how we, Kodak, can help you leverage out-of-the-box solutions that can help boost user adoption and also reflect fully and precisely your methodology. And also go beyond some document management features that SharePoint today does not typically address very well. So here's a use case that's, it's a mining company in South Africa, which has 3 sites, 5 lines of businesses, about 120 document types. And what they're doing typically is that they're scanning technical documentation, HR documentation, they're scanning operational invoices, accountings, et cetera, et cetera. And what they were looking for was for a full ECM solution to be manageable at a distance and easy to deploy and easy to use for every coworker, because the coworkers have different tasks to do, and the document management should not distract them from their day-to-day job. So, different documents. What we've advised to them in order to boost user adoption from the scanning side of different documents in several places, all within one network, was to deploy network scanners with a tactile screen, so a touch screen, where you have a professional document transport for thick documents, for very thin documents, for plastic cards, whatever. You put all of them into the feeder, just press a touch screen that was pre-configured at a distance, because this is an IP device, so manageable at a distance, typically for invoices, incoming mails, any coupons or whatever. Touch the screen, like that, and just walk away. So that's all the coworker needs to do in order to accept, in terms of user adoption, the new process involving new user interfaces and new digitization of paper documents. In the background, what happens? every kind of document type is sent to a distinct watch folder. So you have as many watch folders as document types. In this example, we had 120 document types, so 120 document folders in the background that serves as cache. One Kodak Capture Pro Auto Import license polls all those watch folders 24/7, unattended. So no human intervention here, and just one license. So what happens is for a cost of below £3,600 for one license of Kodak Capture Pro, no matter how many devices, no matter how many users, no matter how many SharePoint servers, no matter how many jobs, we don't care, just one license, you get control, compliance, and ROI. And this, again, today, is a live example for a mining company in South Africa. And they're even adding more users, more devices. They still have the same cost, and it's been paid once and for all. So that's the kind of easy, real-life best practices that we'd like to share with you. If that rings a bell, you can test it for free for 30 days on our website. It's easy to download, and we're here to help also. We have several partners and several salespeople and pre-sales people to help you understand how you can leverage SharePoint ECM at a very, very reasonable cost, let's face it. In the background, this is what happens. The end user, the coworker doesn't need to know it, but let's share that the capture can be very simple, but in the background it can be very, very, very powerful. Typically what we've done here is that every digital document has been created here within a batch when it saw a given barcode here, which gave the name to every document. And all the different variable metadata that appear here for every document were either extracted by zonal OCR or by a database lookup, or by any other mean that come embedded with the Capture Pro, and that can be verified according to simple rules. Any discrepancy occur, so you're certain to have the proper metadata sent to SharePoint. And all the images, whatever the scanner source that you use, are automatically enhanced in order for you to create the best searchable PDF. So then when you search into SharePoint for your document, you easily find it because the image and the different letters were properly captured. So that's the kind of power that you have in the background with Capture Pro. Basically, Kodak Capture Pro, so your link between your paper documents or your electronic documents and SharePoint, again, we saw the kind of cost we're talking about, does those 3 steps, and everything comes embedded. So capture, index, and output. On the capture side, Capture Pro from Kodak works with, of course, Kodak scanners, but also with non-Kodak scanners. You might have a Canon or Fujitsu or HP or Epson or whatever, any kind of scanner. We work with those non-Kodak scanners. Also with multifunction printers. Some of your premises might be equipped with multifunction printers. We can use them with Kodak Capture Pro Auto Import, like we've seen in the example with the Kodak network scanners. What we do during the scanning process, and in the background, we optimize the image quality because a real-life document looks more like something like that, something a really torn paper document. At the same time, we're able to create a perfect black and white image, perfect color image. Why would that be? Because out of the black and white image, you're going to get perfect OCR and perfect text, and out of the color image, of course, you can send that for easy user adoption, for your users. Of course, we extract the data at the same time with barcodes, zonal OCR. And then the second step is about indexing the documents, i.e. validating or populating the metadata that you defined. So it can be manual, of course, it can be a drop-down list, or it can be out of a database lookup. If we read one barcode, we can actually go into an ODBC database and populate all the other metadata on the fly. And finally, we can create some different formats for the images and also for the data at the same time. And not only are we able to send your documents to SharePoint 2010 for that matter, whatever the version, by the way, but also at the same time maybe to Documentum or to any ODBC database or into any file in a folder. So the good thing to remember here is that not only are we agnostic from the capture side in terms of hardware, we're also agnostic in terms of system destination. You might be living in a hybrid world with different systems, or with different processes. Some of them require the documents and data to be sent to SharePoint. Some of them might require to be sent to SAP. We have the connector for that. And everything comes embedded as well. No extra cost, no extra surprise. So this is what Kodak Capture Pro software is all about. Really the link between your documents, your data, and your repository or your SharePoint. And that's the kind of result that you get. Everything sent exactly at the same time. So you can guess the difference that it would have taken to upload all those documents one by one. All the different SharePoint columns are populated automatically because there's an immediate mapping between your indexes, your metadata of your document, and the SharePoint column. This is done automatically. And what we've added here is something to address user adoption in terms of usability. We've added a viewer on top of the SharePoint server. And we'll see in a minute how you can actually leverage that to boost your SharePoint user adoption. And by the way, not just for scanned documents, but for any kind of document. If you have PowerPoint documents, if you have Word, Excel, we can actually make it easier for your users to just view them without requiring to open, to use some bandwidth, and to use the original application for that. Let's focus now on a second real-life example, which comes from the Middle East. It's an insurance company that uses a CRM system based on the SharePoint platform. Okay, so the SharePoint library is the coworker common user interface. So in order to make their life easier, those people preferred not to go to an external application. They actually didn't even want to press a scanner button to launch the documents and the data into SharePoint. They preferred to use SharePoint as the user interface and to scan from SharePoint, from their library, into their library. And we have actually a solution for that, which is called Kodak Scan and View. Kodak Scan and View actually adds into the SharePoint ribbon a scan button that allows you to not only scan ad hoc any kind of PDF document into the library that you're working in, but also to view, to compare, to edit, index, annotate, and find in SharePoint. So it's a very rich application that sits on top of the Kodak document viewer and that is licensed in terms of concurrent use of Kodak Scan View. Not number of users of SharePoint, right? Just concurrent use of Scan View. Typically, if you need to add on top of the document viewer 10 users of Kodak Scan View, 10 people who at the same point in time need to scan ad hoc or who need to view, compare, edit, annotate, etc. at the same time, you would just need 2K. Okay, so 1.3K for the viewer, 2K for 10 users of the scan view, and you have below 3,300 pounds a total solution to scan from SharePoint to SharePoint. A quick demo in slideware, but you can go to our booth to see the full thing live. What you see here is the additional scan document, so it's really embedded within SharePoint. It's actually going to call the Twain driver that you have on your PC, the Twain driver of your scanner, so it can be any kind of a €100 scanner, personal scanner, any kind of scanner. It will create a PDF document into the profile that you have defined within your scanner. You will name manually your document, maybe fill in manually also the required columns that you would have defined at this stage, according to the methodology that you would have put in place. And there you go, you have your documents, scanned ad hoc from SharePoint to SharePoint, from the library you were working in, into the library you're working in. And you can actually preview it right away with the viewer that comes with it. At this point of the presentation, I think it's important to remind what are the best practices to actually to find documents, to have a faster search. So here we're going to focus on the taxonomy. So a big word just to talk about the science of classification. We all know that Microsoft likes to hide behind big words. Taxonomy is nothing more than just the science of classification. We talked about the classification plan earlier on. It's just how do you classify your documents? How do you identify them? What are the metadata or columns that you will define to identify your documents? And what are the groups of columns, i.e. the content types that you will define in order to define your documents? So the best practice, of course, here is to leverage as much as possible the existing content types that are defined in SharePoint. What you have also with the managed metadata within SharePoint is the possibility to avoid duplicates in the definition of metadata, so it's really well thought. And what we're saying here is that you can not only use content types, but also folders, and all of those are completely compliant with Kodak Capture Pro. Typically, if you need to scan some invoices which are linked to given content, all the different columns will appear, and it's going to be an automatic matching or mapping between your indexes and the columns. The folders that you want to create can be generated ad hoc or on the fly and created with Kodak Capture Pro. If you need to create and name a document or to name a folder according to a barcode or any kind of zone law STR content, we can do it easily with Kodak Capture Pro. And that's how you can classify typically the different invoices of one provider according to the name of the provider that you've extracted during scanning. Very, very easy. No programming, just click and configure. How do you name your documents? If you need to name your documents one by one, or in an ad hoc mode, you can do that with, I would say, any kind of scanner today. If you need to name your document ad hoc and manually populate the columns, then we've seen that you can do that also today with ScanView, from your SharePoint library to your SharePoint library. Then if you need to have multiple documents created, named with a variable methodology, and with automatic filling and populating of the columns, then you would need a software like Kodak Capture Pro that's easy to configure and to deploy in standalone or in client-server modes for that matter. And if you happen to search on document content, so within the content itself of the document, then you must be thinking of creating a searchable PDF, of course, so to have a scanning software that embeds the OCR, of course, in any kind of language. So you can do that today with Capture Pro. And then maybe you want to actually leverage the classification plan that you've created. You have decided and you have agreed between the management of your organization and the different lines of businesses that those were the different metadata that make sense within your processes. But within SharePoint, by default, it's not possible to look just for metadata unless you invest in the fast search engine. We're not here to compete with fast. Let this be very clear. Nevertheless, we're here to make it easy for everyone to leverage the search on metadata on multiple columns with the ScanView multi-criteria search on columns. We'll see that in a minute. And finally, how much time do you actually spend searching for documents? I think from a user perspective, it's quite a painful experience to search for a document in SharePoint and to actually find it. Because the kind of result you get within SharePoint when you look for, typically here, a claim, is that kind of user interface. You get lines, so hyperlinks to libraries, to documents, PDF or whatever. So it's not really clear what is the actual document that you want to find. So in terms of user adoption, where Kodak really helps here is to add for a little magnifying glass on the left-hand side of every link, every document link, where you can click and view at a glance an image, not only of the first page, just like any Windows Explorer thumbnail, but actually the full document content by magnifying it or by opening it in a widescreen mode. And you can do that very rapidly without requiring to have Adobe neither on your client PC nor on the server for that matter. And this viewer here allows you to open more than 300 file formats to view them actually at a glance. So one of the best applications here is to embed that document viewer software in a search in a search page within SharePoint, so that on the right-hand side, you can actually see the full content of the documents that you're looking for. Another way to boost the user adoption, thanks to enhanced document management within SharePoint, is also to, again, as we said, leverage the metadata search that you defined. Typically, in that case, I'm an insurance company, and I have some doubts about the cases that were dealt by an agent named Andrea. If I looked into the standard search engine of SharePoint, I would type in Andrea, and I would get all the documents containing or named by the word Andrea. Here, I would get only the result of the column that include the word Andrea, and I only have 2 documents. If I want to be more precise, I know that the plate number includes the word ABC. As a result, I only get 1 document, which I can then process, or typically compare side by side, again, in this additional SharePoint document management user interface that we call Kodak Scan and View. Again, all those features by default are not possible in SharePoint. So what we add with Kodak Scan and View is SharePoint document management possibilities that makes it easy for every kind of coworker, you and me, to deal with documents just like we would deal with them in Windows Explorer, to be crystal clear. And finally, the last no-brainer, I would say, add-on or added value of Kodak Scan and View is this one. As SharePoint users, you might have already tried to edit metadata or edit properties of a document within SharePoint. But maybe you also wanted to check within the documents before you wanted to edit that document. Typically, what you can do in SharePoint today, you can either open the document and see the content, or you close the document, you right-click on it, on the link, and you can edit the metadata. It is not possible by default in SharePoint to do both at the same time. Nevertheless, some of those metadata might actually here be part of an early workflow, then processed by K2 or by Nintex. Typically here I need to check if the police report has been made. Those metadata were captured at origin with the scanner and with Kodak Capture Pro, and those here are defined for second level approver at the headquarters typically. So I need to open the document, open the metadata to edit them, and see that in this document, by enlarging it, yes, the police report has been made, so I can check that one and say that the process has been completed because I can see at a glance that all the documents, typically the ID card, were provided with this document. So I can also sign that with an annotation, which is a dynamic one with my own signature, with the date, and all those annotations, including sticky notes right here, can be traceable for a second approver to trace what I've been doing on this document. And while I do that, you will also notice that this document is checked out to me, so no one else can modify what I'm doing while I'm working on it. So this is really what we call a SharePoint document management user interface to make it easier to collaborate on documents within SharePoint. So by doing this, we help SharePoint really become not just a thin client file share or just a single business process productivity tool, but a full ECM. It's really our motto here at Kodak. By providing hardware to scan, by providing software to scan, and by providing add-ons on top of SharePoint servers with Find in View to find the documents, and with Scan in View to collaborate on the documents. So the key points to take home here would be that SharePoint is a broad and powerful platform, right? It can save you lots of money. Typically, if you compare the current cost that you might have with your current legacy ECM system, just think of the maintenance cost, get rid of those, and leverage SharePoint as your next business platform for ECM. But not everything is out of the box, right? So you need to add some functionalities. Before you do that, think of the different strategies. Gather your management and your different lines of businesses first in order to agree on the classification plans and on the whole methodology. Then find the right consultants and system integrators in order to help you provide the best out-of-the-box software add-ons, typically K2, AvePoint, Kodak, and support from global partners. And if I had just a few key sales takeaways to share with you, would be those three questions. If you have SharePoint and digital documents, well, just for 1.3K pound per SharePoint server, we can make it easy for you to find them at a glance with Kodak Document Viewer. If you have SharePoint and if you need to review and approve digital documents, well, for just an additional 2K on top of those 1.3, for 10 Kodak Scan and View users, concurrent users, we can make it easy for you to edit the metadata while looking at the document content and to scan from SharePoint to SharePoint, to find your documents, to compare, search, etc., and to annotate. And finally, should you have business processes that rely on the input of paper documents and data, well, feel free to test Kodak Capture Pro, an easy, cost-effective, standardized, and proven software, either in standalone or in client-server modes, making it easy to deploy at a distance and to monitor and to manage at a distance, even from a web interface. But all of that is slideware, so if you want to try it for free, you can ask for us for some help to some of our system integrators partners But also just try it online for free. If you don't have a SharePoint server that you want to play with, we give to you a SharePoint site for free for 30 days with the scanning view and with the viewer on top of it. And if you download the Kodak Capture Pro trial, you can also play with your own scanner, scan some documents within this new SharePoint trial site, and see for yourself how easy it is to scan documents, view them, approve them, and process them within SharePoint. With that, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer any of them.